So, final day of Birmingham Tech Week. It's been a really exciting week. So many brilliant speakers sharing all their thoughts and their ideas and sharing their experiences. So I'm really proud to be on the agenda, and thank you very much to the team at Birmingham Tech Week for inviting me along. So today I'm going to be talking to you about digital neuroscience 101 and the importance of empathy in digital experience design. Not the catchiest title, but there's a lot to talk about. So just before we start, a couple of the standard slides really. So Birmingham Tech Week has been brought to you in association with Tech Nation, the West Midlands Growth Company and Department for International Trade. And it's an annual event. It's a brilliant opportunity for the Birmingham tech community to showcase what they do and to share their ideas. And 2020 sponsors, so this year we've got NatWest, Copper, Culture Group, BJSS, Side Trade and BMET. So without further ado, to the slides. Oh, sorry, no, with further ado, we have further partners, 2020 partners there. So I'm not going to go through all of those, but it is recorded, so you can always come back and see who's been contributing. Now, without further ado. So today's agenda, firstly, a little bit of introductions to myself and why I'm here talking to you about digital neuroscience and empathy in digital device design or digital experience design. Some information about the brain. It's quite useful, very high level information, but it's the stuff we need to know when we're starting to think about empathy. Society, ethics and digital. And finally, empathy and design thinking. And if we have time, there's another little section that I'd quite like to talk through around next steps, but we'll see how we're doing. So first off, who am I? I'm Rachel Drinkwater. I am a Senior Business Analyst, currently working in the space of digital teaching and learning. I'm also a lecturer, I'm a writer, I blog, I've started vlogging, I do apologise for my face being plastered all over LinkedIn. I'm a digital enthusiast and I'm also an actor. An actor, I hear you say. Absolutely, I mean one of my starring roles, and that moustache was incredibly itchy. So what is a business analyst? Well, I've been a BA for over 16 years now. Recently, in the last four years or so, moving into the senior business analysis space. And often people don't know what it is I do. Well, putting it concisely, I'm a translator between technical specialists and the business. I sort of live with one foot in each camp. I'm able to talk to both in their language. I'm able to understand business challenges, but I'm also able to understand digital capabilities. And my job is to understand the wider context of the systems and solutions, the strategic space they fit in, the technological space they fit in, and to consider systems. And when I say systems, I mean people, processes, and technology, to consider them holistically. As digital has become more pervasive, I find myself working in a lot more spheres than I used to, maybe 10, 15 years ago. Certainly there's a convergence now between things such as marketing and IT, or customer facing, customer service and IT, that simply didn't exist 10 years ago. So rather than sitting in an IT department that really just services the infrastructure of an organization, I'm working more on projects that are directly affecting an end user or directly contributing to gaining more business. For example, think 10 years ago, it would have been unthinkable that if you worked for a taxi company, half of your product would be an app. But with the advent of Uber, suddenly an IT professional working in a taxi company is designing a customer-facing app. And that app is not only, it's not a side project, it's part of the product, it's half of the product. So the world has really changed. In 2016, I completed an arts master's in creative and media enterprise. It took me about a week to decide that I didn't really want to work in the creative industries. My initial thought was I might become a professional actor. But I found that a lot of what we were studying, the disruption in the creative industries, was becoming more and more relevant in the corporate sector. And digital transformation was really kicking off at this time. So I started to focus my research on digital disruption, on how we interact with our devices, how society has changed around the devices we use and that pervasiveness of technology. And I started really focusing on the neurological effects of these devices on users, and specifically on behaviors such as task switching and multi-device use. So I uncovered some pretty strong and some somewhat concerning sentiments from writers such as Nicholas Carr, Sally Greenfield, and Shelley Truckle. And these are some of the sort of headlines, these sensationalist headlines maybe, that you see in the media. So I wanted to explore these theories. I wanted to look at them maybe in a less sensationalist light and understand actually, how does digital affect society? So today I'm going to share some of those findings and what's changed since. I want to discuss what they mean to us when we're designing systems and tools for our users. So back in 2016, the findings indicated that there were some issues with heavy device users, but concluded that at the time, this was a small subset of the population. But we've had greater adoption into the workplace, schools, society in general. We've increased, as a populace, we are all heavy users of technology. I say all with a little asterisk, there are still subgroups that are not hugely heavy users, but as a majority, we're heavy users. And indeed, in 2018, so only 2 years later, Ofcom concluded that most people in the UK are dependent on their digital devices, need a constant connection to the internet. So before we can go any further, I want to share some of my findings about the brain and how it responds to that digital environment. Now, a disclaimer, I'm not a neuroscientist, nor am I a psychologist, but a lot of the writers I encountered thinking about digital, people such as Greenfield, Carr, Turkle, Doctorow, focused on the effects of technology on our brains. And the idea of rewiring became a really frequent theme. As such, my investigations in this area ended up me finding out some very interesting stuff about the brain. I'm going to share a few of those facts now. So at a high level, there are some areas of the brain that are really stimulated by digital. There are many others, but these are the sort of really key ones that keep coming up. So firstly, we have here, the flashing light, there we go. So we have the prefrontal cortex. This is responsible for planning complex cognitive behavior. It's personality expression, it's decision making, moderating social behavior. It's linked to responsibility, discipline, and maturity. And interestingly enough, when we've had a few too many to drink, this is the part of the brain we start to have trouble to contact and to operate with. And that's probably why we have a lowered level of responsibility, discipline, and maturity. The next section of the brain, the hippocampus, is responsible for deep thinking, focus, for calculating and analysing. It's also, interestingly, responsible for the consolidation of information from short-term memory to long-term memory. We're going to look at why that's relevant in a little while. And finally, the amygdala, sometimes referred to as the lizard brain. It's more instinctive. It's involved in emotional response and emotional learning. It's responsible for our responses to fear. It looks after our hormonal secretions. Its response is associated with reward. It's that sort of hunter-gathering kind of part of the brain. And it also prioritizes what is processed into memory. Again, we're going to come back to memory. So the next thing to know about the brain is some of the chemicals that we release. So oxytocin is known as a feel-good chemical. You sometimes hear it referred to as the love chemical or the empathy chemical. It can encourage us to prioritize relationships over all else. It can therefore make us deprioritize those activities that are not related to our social activities. And it's the key to empathy, bonding, and relationship building. Over here, we have dopamine. Dopamine is our reward chemical. It creates a very relaxed and non-reflective state, but it's also stimulating and motivating. We need dopamine to get anything done. If we don't have dopamine, we never strive for anything. We never seek for anything. It's responsible for desire, for curiosity and seeking behaviors. However, if we have too much dopamine, it can lead to stress, and addiction, and mental health conditions. So there are some real negative impacts. Dopamine itself is addictive. So if we are getting little hits of dopamine, we're constantly seeking more. That seeking behavior starts to work on itself. And because of that, we innately repeat activities that give us a dopamine hit. Now, stimulating environments such as the internet and social media sustain high levels of dopamine. However, things like social media do provide us with little drips of dopamine. So we're getting a lot of it, but in small doses. And much as if you're eating a very Moorish box of chocolates, you eat one and then you want another one. You're seeking that same hit. So we start to get this sort of habitual Pavlovian effect. So my device here, I know I get a dopamine hit when I get a like or a text message or a WhatsApp from a friend. So I start to device check. I'm always Pavloving myself to use that device. So I keep checking, you get device checking behaviors. When we get this sort of, so social media releases this oxytocin, that reward, that sense of belonging, that sense of love, as well as that sense of dopamine, that social chemical. And the cocktail of those two together can make us perceive social relationships to be the most important thing. It can alter our perception of what we view to be rewarding. And it makes us seek immediate gratification over long-term reward. So we're after that oxytocin, a dopamine hit. We don't really care about, what could happen 2-3 years down the line. And this particularly becomes a problem if we're working towards a long goal, say study activity. Much more excited about what's on my phone right now than maybe completing an assignment or studying for that exam, because that's months away, right? So therefore, it reduces our priority, our attention and focus on longer term, productive and deep analytical tasks. Now, the reduced perception of a priority of a task, so if we don't think it's very important, we've knocked it down our list of priorities, that causes us to reduce engagement in the task. Psychologically, it's not very high priority, don't really care too much. And that then increases our chance of being distracted. So you get this cycle. The phone's distracting anyway because of the device. It increases my sense of priority of the device. It reduces my engagement in anything else I might be doing, and therefore increases the chance of me being distracted by my device. A vicious cycle. So this is an example exactly of that. Interviewed students in, apologies, I'm just trying to find the study it was from. I think it was reported in Wired magazine and New York Times. The interviewed students reported feeling intoxicated and gratified by social media use, even though they were aware it was not contributing to their productivity. They couldn't bring themselves to care because they were so excited by the social media. So let's move on to memory. I promised you some stuff on memory, right? So this is a diagram of how memory works. So at one side here, we've got stimulus and input. We are exposed to thousands and thousands of different stimuli every single day. We are perceiving so much around us, but we can only take in a small amount. And actually, it's something like 5% of what we see around us we actually take into our sensory stores, because we're taking in sounds, colours, movement, all of those senses of touch. All of our senses are being processed and filtered down. So we take some of that into our sensory store. Statistic I said, 5%, recently heard that statistic. And we have a forget time of 2 seconds in our sensory store. So we've taken it in, we've absorbed. Over there behind you, there's a green tree. My brain is processing that's a green tree. But do I need to remember that that's a green tree? If I do, it goes into my short-term store, so my short-term memory. And that's quite a small capacity. You may have heard that people can only remember things in numbers of 7. So it's 7 to 15 items is the capacity of that short-term store. Now we've only got a forget time of 5 to 20 seconds in this short-term store if we don't repeat or focus on it. So if a good example, if I'm learning lines when I'm acting, I repeat my lines, I repeat, because that's the way they get committed to my long-term memory. Now, if I'm learning my lines and I'm repeating, or I'm learning a new part of my lines, I get an incoming notification on my device. I'm immediately going to switch to my device. I'm going to forget about my lines, especially if I've been doing it for quite a long time. I might be feeling quite disengaged at that point. My notification comes in, I switch to my device, I get the nice oxytocin and dopamine hit, which starts to activate different parts of my brain. It stops that deep processing and that analytical type part of my brain. I'm engaged in this social interaction. By the time I've come back to my lines, my script, I've overwritten the information in my short-term store with whatever happened on my phone, and I've got to start again with learning the lines. And it's therefore, the whole process has to start again to start committing them to long-term memory. So it can be quite detrimental to these productive tasks we need to sort of really focus on. And this is exactly what Cory Doctorow is referring to here. biggest impediment to your concentration is your computer's ecosystem of interruption technologies. Now, he's referring to those notifications on our devices, little blinking lights and pinging sounds and numbered icons constantly demanding our attention. We get emails telling us to hurry, it's our last chance, sale ends tonight. That's triggering the amygdala, that stress response, because the sense of running out of time triggers the amygdala. Our devices, our computers and our smartwatches are constantly with us. There's no escape, and they're constantly interrupting us with promise of satisfaction and fulfillment, social bonding, and reward, and that lovely, lovely, heady chemical mix. So the final little bit about the brain, well, today anyway, there's a huge amount to know about the brain and how it works on digital, but for the purposes of today, neurons that fire together wire together. And this was a phrase coined by Hebb. Well, it's actually a phrase coined by Lowell and Singer, referring to a rule created by Hebb in 1949. And this is referring to how the brain changes in response to our environment and behavior. It's known as brain plasticity or rewiring or neuroplasticity. Now, with repetition and frequent use, the brain forges links between neurons that are used in a task. So if I'm learning to play piano, my brain starts to gel or form connections between the neurons that I use to play piano or to play a specific piece. And I get that sort of muscle memory. We all have it driving vehicles, driving a car. Anyone will know you drive a car in the morning, and by the time you get to work, you've sort of forgotten what you were doing. You don't really remember the journey because it becomes habitual. If an activity is frequently repeated, the links become stronger and stronger, and it becomes easier for the brain to carry out that activity. It becomes habitual or second nature. However, the brain also reallocates neurons that are not being used. We get out of practice. And the problem here is, in this world where we're constantly switching between activities because our phones keep distracting us, or our devices keep distracting us, or little pop-up notifications on our laptop keeps distracting us, there's a theory and a lot of discussion around how we are becoming wired for this sort of distraction. We are wired to constantly divide our attention rather than we're becoming less used to focusing for a long period of time on a document or a book. We're finding it harder and harder to just focus on one thing. And all of this, and the societal acceptance of this, the fact that in the workplace, in schools, sitting around the dinner table, it is more and more acceptable to use your devices. All of this is leading to some of these behaviors. So we've got device checking, continuous partial attention, smartphone addiction and task switching, multi-screening and hyperattention. And we know that too much stimulus, such as all of these behaviors and the stimulus we get from our devices, can lead to mental fatigue and a number of mental health conditions. So what does this mean for society and digital? Well, there's enough research and findings to indicate there are some real societal issues arising from this. Ipsos Mori in 2018 said there's a clear association between time spent online and some of the symptoms of mental ill health. And some of the statistics I've sort of noticed and identified as I've been doing some research on this, more than a quarter of children in the UK, up to 15 years old, spending 3 hours or more on social networking sites, have symptoms of mental ill health. And that's compared with only 12% for those who don't use it. So there is a clear, there's a clear trend there. People using between 7 and 11 platforms have 3 times more higher risk of mental health conditions. So there really seems to be some correlation there. 79% of 12 to 15-year-olds had potentially harmful experiences online. 3/4 of young adults experience FOMO. If you're not familiar with the term FOMO, it's defined as a pervasive pervasive apprehension that others might be having rewarding experiences from which one is absent. So that sense that somebody else's life is better than ours. And we get this a lot with social media because on Instagram, this curated life, this perfect view of other people's lives. And FOMO is associated with lower need satisfaction, lower mood and lower life satisfaction. Techno stress and techno burnout are on the rise and being recognized as significant issues in themselves. One study found that students across all ages averaged 6 minutes of focus time before they could switch to a technological distraction. So they could study for 6 minutes before deciding they had to check their phones. And 87% of US teachers think today's digital technologies are creating an easily distracted generation with short attention spans. But this is all really doom and gloom. I feel like I might be giving the wrong impression of myself. I love technology. I work in IT. I design digital experiences for a living. We've identified there are some significant issues, but let's not forget that technology isn't just social media. There are a wide range of wonderful tech solutions that are doing amazing things in technology. And if any of you are interested in sort of following more of these good news stories, there's a hashtag tech for good. There's some amazing things going on out there. And secondly, these statistics and the things we've gone through previously, the statistics and the news reports are very one-sided. I think we need to look at a different perspective. So Ipsos Mori asked, are Gen Z glued to technology? Perhaps it's not an addiction, perhaps it's just an extension of themselves. And indeed, young people demonstrated improved skills in so many areas as a direct result of using technology. They have an ability to know where to get information. So they may not necessarily remember information, but they always have a bookmarking system in their minds of where to get that info. They can use a wider range of research sources. 48%, though they're using a lot of technology, are using it to watch how-to videos and tutorials, though that number was lower from households in poorer environments or less privileged environments. So there's some work to be done maybe there on equality and diversity. They had an increased ability to deal with high-paced and high-stimulus environments, and they're incredibly comfortable with digital devices, perhaps unsurprisingly. Now, this fear of this new technology is nothing new. When the Gutenberg printing press came out, there was concern that actually people would become quite stupid because they didn't have to remember things anymore because it would all be written down. So actually, throughout the ages, when new technologies have come into society, people have been very concerned. At the Secret Lives of Students last year, Ipsos Mori asked, maybe we don't, are these negative messages just legacy attitudes? Perhaps we view technology in a very sort of legacy way. And Microsoft's Jonathan Grudin actually said, well, maybe these are the behaviors that young people will need to thrive in the modern society and workplace. This is the society we live in, so maybe they don't need those older behaviors. So it's not clear-cut. Well, who'd have thought? Very few things are. And perhaps to an extent, some of the concerns are due to a society that's really in its infancy when we talk about technology. But there's enough evidence to suggest there are some serious issues that have arisen from our society's ready adoption of technology. The ethical question comes when we're designing systems. From a commercial sense, we want to exploit what we know. It's commonly used by advertising and marketing. The use of FOMO, of attention-grabbing techniques. We live in a world where attention is currency. Everybody's online, there's so many things to choose from. We want our little slice of the attention pie. We want to make our product stand out. And I was speaking to a fellow BA just the other week who is using exactly this on their company's app, that attention grabbing, that using that neuroscience to capture people's attention. It's not a bad thing. It is commercial sense. We live in a world, as I've said, where attention is overcrowded, it's competitive. We need to get our slice of the pie. And there's a great book actually called The Attention Economy by John Beck and Thomas Davenport, which goes into that in a lot of detail. It's fascinating. From an ethical point of view, however, we have to protect against what the BCS's Adam Philthorpe calls the unintended impacts of technology when we design systems, or at least the negative unintended impacts. Sometimes we can put a system out there and a user starts using it in a very different way, and it's genius. They found a shortcut, or they've started to almost evolve the use of the system. We can bring that feedback in. The negative unintended impacts we really want to avoid. The pressure is increasing for large social platforms and tech disruptors to adopt a portion of responsibility for the social impact of their digital products. Now, I say a proportion because parents, educators, individuals, society in general, we all have to bear responsibility. As a business analyst on a project developing a system, I'm actually really well placed to challenge, to think holistically and to be customer centric. So the first thing that we can do is to perhaps expand what we document when we're capturing requirements. We put together non-functional requirements. These are the requirements that underpin a system. They're not necessarily the things that a system do, which is the functional requirements. They are the things that facilitate the system. Things like the infrastructure, performance of a system, how robust it needs to be. Other things we can include in there may be diversity and inclusion. Are we excluding anybody? Ethics, training, data privacy, and cybersecurity. If we think more carefully about these during that upfront analysis stage, we stand a much better chance of ironing out some of those unintended impacts. And another way we can do this, and we can start to draw out some of these unintended impacts, is using empathy and design thinking. So Gartner define design thinking as a multidisciplinary process that builds solutions in a technically feasible, commercially sustainable, and emotionally meaningful way. So it's going back to what we were talking about earlier, that balance of making commercial sense and being a sensible thing for an organization to do from a financial and commercial sense, but also thinking emotionally and empathetically about the customer. You might also hear this called human-centered design or systems thinking. So this is the design thinking process. We use empathy in customer and user journey mapping to consider the state of mind, the emotion and feelings, the environment and the situation that our customer or user is in. We seek to understand their thoughts, emotions and feelings and how they interact with us. So at a certain point in that journey, how do they feel? Are they happy with us? Are they happy where they are? What are those points we need to focus on? And if we're getting points where the mood is low, so they're unhappy with their interaction with us, we know that they're points we need to focus on. And if we're doing this, if we're considering that wider context in which they're using our product, we can uncover alternative journeys, not just the happy path, but actually where is this process going wrong? Where could they branch off what we expect them to do? We need to start putting ourselves in their shoes. This is where we use personas. Personas are fictional characters. They represent a group of users which have the same needs, purpose, and expectations. We tend to create a profile for an individual, a sort of fictional individual that has certain characteristics. And this can really help us to build in diversity and cater for a wider range of users, considering from many, many different viewpoints. There's a real danger here that we can build in bias. If we try to develop these personas from our own perspective, it's essential that we gather a wider range of people as possible and engage with those end users themselves to really understand it from those different perspectives that we could never have a perspective of just sitting from where we sit. We have to speak to those people to get their worldview. So this is an example of customer or user journey mapping, and this is a tool that can be used to document that end-to-end journey. So I'm just going to, this is one that I've stolen unashamedly off the internet. It's a really good example. It's quite a nice example because it's got photographs, it's the pictures, and it's very creative. But you can do a much more cut down version of this. The really important parts are the user goals. So at each stage of their journey with us, and you can see those stages across the, we've got aware, search, way to coffee. This journey is the somebody seeking a cup of coffee, which is the other reason I use it. I think we can all relate to that, waking up in the morning needing a coffee or a cup of tea. So as they move through that journey, what are their goals at each stage? What, as a provider of a service or of a product, what do we need to try and help them achieve? Because if we can help them achieve their goals, we're going to have a really happy customer. Just go down a couple of sections because we'll pass over the nice creative bits there, but the user expectations. So again, what's their success factor? So we've got their objective, we know what they're trying to achieve, but actually what does good look like for them? Moving down a section, we've got the process, so that can be very useful when we start to drill down into those step-by-step processes. And then down here, so this is a customer journey rather than a user journey. So this is how a customer interacts with the organization. We can see they've got some digital touch points down here, and I'm pointing at the screen and you can't see me because I'm so used to presenting. So let me wiggle my mouse down here. Process and channels. I've got these digital touch points, so Google over here, face-to-face smartphone, to start to pull out how the user will interact with it. And that will come in useful later when we start to think what that experience will look like when they're actually interacting with the device. And then this is what I was talking to you about down here, experience. So are they sad? A bit sad at the front here and a little bit unhappy here where they're interacting with us face-to-face. Actually, they're super happy on this one here. This really helps us because we can do a before, an as-is situation. So where are they unhappy? Where do we need to focus our energies improving that customer experience? And then we can do sort of a future view. So what does it look like in a happier world? So I'm going to run through a quick persona where we're running quite short of time. So I normally do two. In fact, I'll skip over this one. I'll go for the next one because I'll come back to that a little later. So this is a happier story than the previous one. So we've got Will. Will's a postgraduate master's student. Here's his scenario. He's researching an assignment. He's well on track. He's on schedule. He's engaged in the subject he's researching. But he wants to find a post. His lecturer has posted something on the learning management system. And he wants to go and track down that document and needs to go and find that. So his objective for this particular point in his journey with us is to complete the first draft of the assignment in this study session. So his emotional state at the moment, he's engaged in his study. He's calm, he's happy, he's in a really good place. We know that his hippocampus and his prefrontal cortex doing lots of work, there's lots of discipline, there's lots of focus. Oh, just spoilers there. We know he's at home, he's inside, he's got some music playing in the background, but it's not really distracting him. He's sitting down to desk and table, he's comfortable. So all of these factors are facilitating him sitting there doing lots of good work. However, we know that when he switches to another task, when he goes to try and find that post on the learning management system, it's introducing a risk. If he picks up a mobile to open his LMS or switches to a different window, opens a browser window, he is likely to encounter social media notifications. That's going to switch him straight out of that deep thinking mode. It's going to introduce dopamine and oxytocin into the mix. It's going to encourage him to engage with that social conversation. He's going to get email notifications telling him he's running out of time on a sale or that he needs to hurry. And that's going to activate that amygdala. He's going to be looking at recommendations for things to buy. He's going to get recommendations of new on Netflix. He is running a gauntlet of distractions. Now, we're hopefully Will is so engaged in his subject and his prefrontal cortex is doing all that nice discipline and responsible work that he can dodge that minefield of distractions and just check the post he needs and get right back to his assignment. But we know we're going to get chemicals released, we're going to get different parts of the brain activating. He really is running a gauntlet. How could we help him with our systems design? Well, we could build a study app that switches off notifications on whatever device you're using it on. That means he can switch between windows and he's much less likely to encounter something that tries to lure him away. It could be something that has a timer that goes off if you're using it on a non-study activity. So it detects that you're on Snapchat or Facebook, and it triggers an alert and says, hey, Will, you need to get back to work. Or something that has an inbuilt ad blocker. So that pair of trainers that Will's been keeping an eye on don't keep popping up and tempt him with a pesky little amygdala-inducing message of low stock, hurry up, Will, come buy the trainers. The point is that by thinking about his actions, his environment, his journey, his goals, and building in what we know about how his brain is working, we can build apps and systems that are best for Will, who's our user, our customer, and help him fulfill what he's trying to achieve. We keep him happy, he achieves our goals with us, and he's going to be a much stronger, happier customer. Sounded a bit like Boris Johnson then, robust customer. So, takeaway number one, in summary, our brains adapt and change in response to technology use. Our behaviors change in response to this. Takeaway two, some of the negative messages around technology use are true. Unintended impacts and unethical design may cause issues. Takeaway three, we're all responsible for considering and mitigating against the negative and unintended impacts of technology. Number four, as business analysts or any tech professional, we are well placed and have the tools and techniques to use to help with this. And takeaway 5, using empathy to consider a user's objective, environment, technology, and emotions helps us to build a user-centric digital journey and have happy customers. So we are almost at the end of our time. So just before we move on to Q&A, I'm doing more research on this. I'm doing more research with a view to writing a book and coming up with some practical ways that we can apply this in the workplace. I'm looking for volunteers. So if anybody has any case studies where they've used this sort of approach to designing systems, or where this would have been actually really useful. I'm also developing a practical model. So again, any volunteers who would be interested in testing this as a proof of concept. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and come back and see if there's any questions in the chat. So there's no questions at the moment. Would anyone like to, so if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the chat window. Okay, no questions. In which case, I'll just share this one more time. Oh gosh, no, I won't. Apologies, having some tech problems. If you do have any questions following the session, we'll certainly take this offline. Please do contact me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at @Drinkwater. Oh, lovely. Thank you, Ryan. Oh, I've got some questions. Lovely. So thank you, Ryan. Glad you enjoyed it. And also Ian, thank you. Aruna, how do you think the behavior of Facebook, etc., impacts on design? It's interesting. So we are seeing technology. Certainly, I'm working in the education sector at the moment. And because we know that our student users use a lot of social media and they're very comfortable in that space, we're starting to see a lot of design of student-facing systems that emulate Facebook and emulate that sort of environment. I feel the danger of that, of course, is that we need to ensure that it still facilitates their study tasks, but we are operating in a space that they're very comfortable in. So I think people do use a lot of that Facebook psychology and that Facebook design principle in their systems design now because people are so comfortable with it. Something I think is quite dangerous in that space and something we need to be aware of. It's very tempting to say, it's just like Facebook, we don't need to give them any training. They know how to use this. And I think that is always a danger, that we roll systems out assuming it's easy enough to use. And I think there should always be embedding, there should always be training. And there always also needs to be a sort of permission. Because it may look like social media, people may have concerns about using it in a work environment. So there's an element of permission and teaching people that it's okay to use and the rules around using it. Hope that answered your question. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent. What you have outlined seems more responsible. Thank you, Aruna. Thank you, Deborah. Really interesting. A question from Ollie is, do you think tech will evolve from this current attention balancing era to something more focused, and how? It's interesting. We're seeing a lot of reports of people doing sort of digital detoxing and moving offline. I think we may, I don't think we'll ever slow down in our evolution of technology, but I think we'll grow to use it maybe more responsibly. I think we're in our such early days of technology adoption. We're really rushing to catch up. We're doing a lot of sort of fast to market things. We're putting a lot out into the market and just seeing how it goes. You know, we see a lot of those headlines I shared, things like Strava. They put a feature out and then people report, oh, we don't like this, it's a bit creepy. People can see where I run on a daily basis. Or the Uber situation where it did surge pricing. So I think we will start to see more responsible use, and we will build in that feedback as well as things happen that maybe weren't the best sort of outcomes of the use of that technology. Will start to improve, and we've seen that throughout history. You know, cars, when cars first came out onto the roads, you know, statistically road traffic accidents have gone down because we've learnt from history. It's quite often the way that new technology works, that we learn from, unfortunately, the effects on society, the good and the bad. So Deborah, I think there needs to be a balance between real blended learning strategy and technology. Absolutely. I think it's a very, very good point. I think it's important that anything we introduce into the education sector is underpinned by pedagogical practice, that teaching and learning practice. It needs to work alongside that and supplement that rather than the technology driving the practice. Ian, can artificial intelligence help? For example, many phones now have self-learning capabilities to filter out unwanted distractions. Yeah, and I think there are two sides to this. So absolutely, I think there's a lot of functionality we can use on our devices and in our systems design that, as you say, filter out unwanted distractions. We can set our phones to do not disturb. And I think it'd be great if certain apps, if we know that an app or a piece of software is being used for focus, we have the opportunity to toggle on and off. And again, a lot of those student-facing systems have that opportunity. You can turn notifications off. With artificial intelligence, there's a lot in the media and in the press at the moment about how we are building unconscious bias into artificial intelligence. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier about getting a wide enough set of viewpoints when we develop things like that, so we don't accidentally build in biases. So we make sure we do build in diversity and all those different worldviews. Okay, I think we are running very close to time now. I think I might have kept you actually a little bit longer than I'd originally advertised, but thank you so much for everyone coming. I'm, as I said, available on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Rachel Drinkwater, so do come and find me to continue this conversation offline. You can find me on Twitter at @redrinkwater. I've got a blog, www.racheldrinkwater.com. So do track me down, and I'm more than happy to discuss this, continue this discussion. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been wonderful to be here, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Take care.